So you have decided to learn the cloud computing in the year 2025. Well, that's a very good decision. But do you know how to make your choices? How to choose between different cloud providers? For example, Microsoft Azure, Amazon AWS, Google GCP, IBM, Oracle. There are so many to choose from. So how do you actually make a choice? Well, I have just the right answer for you. So keep watching this video because in 2025, cloud computing is becoming more critical than ever. So today I will break down the top titans of the cloud computing world and who are the contenders. Well, from the Microsoft side, we have Azure. From the Amazon side, we have AWS. And from the Google side, we have GCP. And what exactly are we going to cover in this video? Well, we will start with a quick history of each cloud provider. We will look at the core strength of each cloud provider. And then I will tell you why to use each cloud provider. What are the advantages and disadvantages of each of them? Then I will tell you top 5 services from each cloud provider. And I will also give you comparison of the pricing, total number of services, learning curves, very important point, web console of each cloud provider. Then I will tell you what are the top certifications, and finally conclusion, who is the actual winner. So let's start with some quick history lesson. So here I will start with the AWS because that was the first cloud provider. So AWS launched the EC2 in the year 2006, the pioneer of the modern cloud computing. And AWS pioneered the cloud computing by introducing elastic cloud computing, that's the EC2, and the S3, which is the storage services. And its early mover advantage made the AWS the largest and most mature cloud provider today, holding a significant market share of 33%. Now let's look at the Azure. So Azure is not far behind from the AWS, holding the market share of 24%. And then Microsoft Azure first announced in October 2008. So just after a couple of years from the AWS launch, but the Azure, it actually became commercially available in the early 2010 as more and more services were added. So that was the power of Microsoft Azure, the existing customer base, and with the deep integration with Microsoft tools like Windows Server, Active Directory, which is now known as Microsoft Entra ID, and the Office 365. Azure actually really very quickly become the preferred choice of the business familiar with the Microsoft softwares. And then we have our third contender, Google GCP, which was actually launched in the year 2008, but it became more widely adopted a little later. And the GCP currently holds the 11% of the market share. And the GCP first came online in the year 2008 with the launch of a product called App Engine, built on the Google internal infrastructure and the expertise in the large-scale data processing and machine learning. And I'm very sure that you know the services like YouTube, Gmail, Google Maps, all are powered by the Google Cloud infrastructure. So that was a quick history lesson for you. Now let's look at the core strength of each of these cloud providers. So starting once again with the AWS, the breadth and the depth of the services, mature ecosystem, vast community, and the first mover advantage really work for AWS. It really has its strength in the compute power, storage option, and the third-party integration. Flexible and reliable for the startups and enterprise alike. Now let's check on the Azure. So Azure with the enterprise focus, hybrid cloud capabilities, strong integration with the Microsoft products, robust compliance certifications, and it's also known for its enterprise-grade solutions and the hybrid cloud strategy. And one wonderful feature in the Microsoft Azure is the seamless hybrid solution with Azure Arc. And from here, let's talk about the Google GCP. Well, the Google GCP, the data analytics, the machine learning, AI, Kubernetes, or the container orchestration with the innovative technologies. That's the core strength of the Google GCP. And now that you understand what are the core strength of each cloud provider, let's understand why exactly should you use each cloud provider. So starting with the AWS, well, the startups, the large enterprises, diverse workloads, and the need for the vast range of services, rapid scaling, those are the points that goes in the favor of AWS. Now let's understand why use Azure. Well, Azure, as I just mentioned, it has the existing Microsoft customers and a very good hybrid cloud deployments, enterprise application, compliance requirement, .NET development, and the other Microsoft products very closely knitted together in all this ecosystem of Microsoft Azure. But what about the Google GCP? Well, GCP, I would say, is really for the data-driven companies who really are looking for the AI and ML initiatives. Then I think Google GCP is also a good choice. But you know what? All the services and the core strength that I just mentioned for each cloud provider are kind of overlapping. So it doesn't mean that in case Google GCP is very good in the Kubernetes, because in one sense he's the father of the Kubernetes. That doesn't mean that Azure and AWS do not have a solid infrastructure for Kubernetes, AI, or ML. They also have a solid foundation for all these services, and you can build really wonderful application on all the three cloud providers. Now let me very quickly tell you what are the advantages and disadvantages of each of them. So let's look at the advantages first for each cloud provider, starting with the AWS. Now AWS has a very mature ecosystem, wide range of services, and a global reach. Now coming to the Azure, well, Azure has a very good hybrid cloud capabilities with a very strong integration for Microsoft services and the ecosystem. Now coming to the GCP, well, GCP is a leading cloud provider in terms of data analytics, AI, ML, or strong Kubernetes service offerings. So that is where GCP stands out. Now coming to the disadvantages, well, in a way I should not be calling them disadvantages, maybe some little lesser or some small negative points. Starting with the AWS, I would say AWS is little bit complex for the beginners, and it can be really complex to manage due to the sheer number of services and the offerings that AWS provide. And what about the Azure? Well, Azure can be expensive for certain type of workloads in case you're not using the Microsoft licensing, and it's slightly weaker in terms of the third party integration as compared to AWS. But I would say that is just a matter of time, because it launched a little later, so it will take some time to reach there. And what about the GCP? Well, I would say GCP market share is of course very smaller than the AWS and the Azure, and the documentation in Google GCP can be a little less comprehensive. So I think you have to decide whether these are disadvantages, or maybe some of the feature which are strong in some other cloud provider and some are not in some of the cloud provider. So let's look at the top 5 services, and this will give you a fair idea how these cloud provider stand up against each other. So let me tell you what are and I have actually divided the services into multiple categories. So first of all, I have chosen compute, then I have chosen storage, then I have chosen databases, serverless, and container. So let's do a quick comparison between all these important services for each cloud provider. Looking at the AWS and starting with the compute, AWS has EC2 with various instance types and pricing models. Coming to the Azure, it has virtual machine, similar, multiple instance types and pricing. GCP also offers similar services by the name of compute engines, and similar to AWS and Azure, it also offers various instance types and pricing models. Then let's look at the storage services. So in the storage category, AWS has S3, which is the object storage with various storage classes, and the counterpart in Microsoft Azure is blob storage, which is again a object storage. Google has Google Cloud Storage. So that is the storage comparison. Looking at the databases, well, AWS has RDS, which is the relational databases, and then it also has DynamoDB, the NoSQL database. Azure offers similar services. So there is Azure SQL database, which is the relational database, and then we have Cosmos DB, which is kind of multi-model NoSQL database. Then we have in the GCP, we have Cloud SQL and Cloud Spanner. Which is now Cloud Spanner is also NoSQL and globally distributed. And what about the serverless? Well, the world is talking about them. So let's compare that also. So the AWS has AWS Lambda, Microsoft Azure has Azure Functions, and similar to Microsoft Azure, Google has also the Cloud Functions. Now let's very quickly compare the container orchestration. So AWS has EKS, the Azure has AKS, and the Google has JKE. And you know what, friends, soon I will be doing a very detailed video on all these important services. We will compare all these services in all the cloud providers, and not only that, I will give you the real business cases where you can actually use these services, so you will have a really good understanding in choosing between Microsoft Azure, AWS, GCP. So please watch that video also. It will be released within some days. And yes, I'm working on the Microsoft Zero to Hero series that will be launched very soon. Now let's very quickly check out what are the pricing comparison between all these three titans of the cloud world. Now friends, there can be multiple factors affecting the pricing in the cloud computing world, and here I'm sure you know that we have pay as you go, we have reserved instances, which are the long term commitments with the cloud providers. We also have hybrid benefits, the licensing benefits which Microsoft Azure offers, and we have spot instances, we have preemptible virtual machines. So there are loads of factors that affect the pricing, and it's not easy to consider everything in this small and quick video, but I will give you a very quick comparison, so please keep these things in mind. So starting with the AWS, well, AWS offers flexible pricing models, but it can be costly at scale without optimization. What about Azure? Azure has more competitive pricing models for the enterprise tools. And then we have Google GCP, which is known for its sustained use discount, making it attractive for the analytics and the compute heavy workloads. And what are the total number of services in each of the cloud providers? It's hard to tell the exact figures, but I have consolidated from various sources the total number of services. So AWS has roughly 200 services. So this is the biggest cloud provider so far. Then we have Microsoft Azure with 100 plus services, and Google also has 100 plus services. So all these cloud providers keep adding new services, so keep an eye on them. I will leave some documentation links. Let's look at what is the time or what is the learning curve that is needed for each of these cloud provider. Very important factor, especially for the people who are starting with the cloud computing. So AWS with large community, extensive documentation, but can be really overwhelming to learn due to the sheer number of services that AWS offers. And I will also tell what is my personal liking for these cloud providers in terms of learning curve, and I will also give you the exact reason why I like certain cloud provider, so you will understand that in just a little moment. Coming to the Azure, well, Azure, I have said many times, Azure has strong integration with Microsoft landscape. So in case you're coming from the Microsoft background, that could be really easier for you to onboard on Microsoft Azure. On the other hand, the Google GCP, it really focuses on the developer tools, but it has, at least at this point of time, it has smaller community than AWS and Azure. But I would say it has, simplified user interface, and there is good amount of documentation, so in that sense it is also beginner friendly. But let me tell you, personally I love Microsoft Azure the most. Why so? Because Microsoft services are really intuitive and easy to guess, and let me give you an example of this. So Microsoft calls it Azure virtual machines, very simple, and gives you an idea about what is the service just by listening the name of the service. But AWS, on the other hand, it calls it EC2. What is EC2? Well, EC2 is Amazon Elastic Cloud Compute. So it's not very easy to guess. And second example could be the storage services. On one hand, the Microsoft calls it Azure Storage Account. The GCP calls it the Google Cloud Storage. On the other hand, the AWS calls it AWS S3. So you have to really dig into the documentation to understand AWS S3 is actually the AWS Simple Storage Service. So S3. So that is why I personally like the naming convention from Microsoft Azure. Really simple, but that is just a very personal thing. I like it because of the simplified naming convention, but it is not a deal breaker. I mean, of course, you can be really good in remembering the name. I am not very good with the name, so that is why I personally like. And the other reason was that in my projects we were using loads of Microsoft technologies already, so that gave us a easy switch to Microsoft Azure. So that is why personal inclination towards Microsoft Azure. But let me tell you, I've been using AWS as well, and GCP as well in multiple other projects, and I can tell you all these cloud providers are offering wonderful services, and the best part is that all these cloud providers, they offer free accounts for you to learn and play with all these services. So Microsoft Azure and AWS, they offer you $200 of credit, while on the other hand, if I remember correctly, GCP offers $300 worth of credit, and you can create a free account. I have talked about free account, how to create that in multiple previous videos. Please check them out. And with all these free accounts, my friends, you can pretty much virtually play with all the services that these cloud providers offer. A wonderful way to start learning cloud computing free of cost. And yes, I've given the links in the description box. You will find the links to the AWS, Azure, GCP to open the free accounts. So please go ahead and use them full advantage. And now let's very quickly talk about the web consoles and compare each of them. So AWS has a very feature rich but little complex web console. It really requires experience to navigate efficiently. On the other hand, Microsoft Azure is intuitive and polished, and it really integrates well with the Visual Studio Code, of course. And then we have GCP. It has really minimalistic and easy to use interface. But is that all for this video? No, let's compare the top certification for each of these cloud providers. Let's start with AWS. And on the AWS, you can start doing with the AWS Cloud Practitioner exam, which is the fundamental exam. And once you have done that, then you can move on to the other certification like AWS Certified Solutions Architect Associate level. Then we have AWS Certified Developer. Third one is AWS Certified SysOps Administrator. Fourth one, AWS Certified Data Analytics. And the fifth one is AWS Certified DevOps Engineer. What about Azure? Well, in the Azure, we have Microsoft Certified Azure Fundamental, which is AZ900. And there are other versions of it. You have DP900, you have AI900, you have SC900. All these exams are fundamental exams. They really concentrate on various aspects. Some are focusing on data, DP900. Some is for the AI, AI900. Some is for security. And the AZ900, on the other hand, is the most famous and most popular certification in Microsoft Azure to start with. And once you're done with the fundamentals, you can then move on to the Azure Administrator Associate. Then we have on the third number, we have Azure Solution Architect Expert level. And then we have on the data side, you can move on to the Azure Data Engineer Associate level. And DevOps, we have Azure DevOps Engineer Expert level. And similarly, on the Google side, we have Google Cloud Digital Leader, which again is a fundamental level certification. And once you have understood the Google fundamentals, then you can move on to the Google Cloud Associate Cloud Engineer. You can also look at the Google Professional Data Engineer. Then we have Google Professional Cloud Architect. And then machine learning side, we have Google Professional Machine Learning Engineer. So those are the top 5 certification from each of these cloud providers. And now what exactly is the conclusion? Let's check out that. So AWS, I would say, is one of the most experienced player or the oldest one. And it has wide community and support and multiple famous brands like Netflix, Airbnb, Unilever, BMW, Samsung, MIA, Zynga, Twitch, LinkedIn, Facebook, Baidu, ESPN. All these global giants are working on the support of the AWS cloud services. But that doesn't mean that Azure is falling behind. Well, Azure has really some high profile customers. And you know what? A fun fact, Azure has almost 80% of the Fortune 500 companies as its clients. And some of the big brands with Microsoft Azure is eBay, Boeing, Samsung, HP, Polycon, GE Healthcare, Johnson Controls, BMW, Travelocity, Fujifilms, Honeywell, and Apple. And then we have Google GCP. Remember, YouTube, Gmail, Google Maps, all these are running on Google GCP. And it also has some of the very famous brands like HSBC, Vimeo, Twitter, PayPal, Snapchat, and 20th Century Fox, the film company. Then we have Best Buy, Bloomberg, Domino's, Spotify, and maybe others as well. And the choice between the AWS, Azure, GCP, it really often depends on the budgets, use cases, existing infrastructure, and the complexity that you need in your company or your application. But ultimately, all the three cloud provider platforms, they really offer similar services, such as they are kind of interchangeable in most of the cases. So I would say do not be carried away with who is offering the most number of services, because most of the time you wouldn't be using all the services. So you really have to think about it, and what are the other applications that you're using in your landscape. So that is very important for you. You have to consider what are the regions or the availability of services. so that you can decide upon the latency of the services for your customers, your application latency. So those are important factors. But I'm using, of course, Microsoft Azure most of the time because it's seamless integration with the Microsoft products like Windows, .NET, Visual Studio. And not just that, I also like the Microsoft Cognitive Services. However, for some of the projects, I'm also using the AWS and GCP. So yes, I heavily rely on the Microsoft products and the services. So that is why first choice or the most used cloud provider for me is Microsoft Azure. But if that's not the case with you, and if you really want a wide range of services, mature ecosystem, then probably you can consider AWS. But in case you really prioritize the data analytics, you prioritize the big data processing, machine learning, then Google GCP can be a good choice. And friends, I would be really happy to answer all of your questions, all of your doubts, in case you are confused between choosing all these cloud providers. But yes, I can tell you the services are the most important. And that's why, my friends, in the very next video, I will have a very detailed comparison between all these cloud providers and their services on various categories: compute, storage, AI, security. So that's going to be a very important video for you in case you are going to take a decision between choosing any of these cloud providers. And that's all for today. I will see you in the next video. Till then, stay fit, keep learning, and thanks for watching.